think anytime we hear a story about leadership, we look at it like it's common sense. But common sense is not common practice. And I think hearing the stories that these leaders provide give all of us a roadmap to being better at influencing other people.
I can't think of a better time to take advantage of the literally hundreds of years of experience that you will glean in a very succinct and practical way through the wonderful stories that are included in this book.
Each chapter in this book represents a different leader who is willing to share and impart their knowledge and wisdom to turn you into a leader.
The stories are inspiring and illustrative, and they offer insightful and practical advice from exceptional leaders who have achieved extraordinary accomplishments, transformations, and change.
I know that I've always found the most important thing I can do is watch other leaders. What makes them successful, and what can I emulate that might make me a better leader?
The personal stories of how individual leaders overcame the challenges that they were facing is going to be most helpful to people.
I think one of the things folks can get out of this book is learning from someone else's mistakes, right? I've learned a lot from my own mistakes along the way, and have been able to share some of that.
These are amazing people with incredible backgrounds offering their own lessons of experience to all of us.
The biggest takeaway from Lessons from Leaders is that there's a wide variety of leadership styles, and it's important that you find the best style for you and be genuine to yourself.
The more you understand how leadership contributes to the goals and objectives of the organization, the better you're going to be at helping everybody to fit in, participate, and bring their best selves to work together.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session. We appreciate you joining us. Please let us know where you're joining from in the chat section. We are thrilled to have you with us today for a conversation on leadership, and we look forward to sharing some of the key leadership lessons from the book Lessons from Leaders. Lessons from Leaders is a diverse collection of candid stories from 15 remarkable leaders who share their insights, experiences, and the practical lessons we can all apply to shape our own personal leadership journeys. With that, I would like to introduce you to our host for today, Sam Shriver, the Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership and Training Transfer at the Center for Leadership Studies, the author of From Coach to Coach and the 4 Moments of Truth, and co-author of Lessons from Leaders. Sam, welcome.
Susie, thank you very much. Thanks to you and Eric for putting all this together. And on behalf of everybody at the Center for Leadership Studies, very, very excited that whoever is joining us has taken time out of their very busy schedules to do so. I try to get excited every day. I didn't have to try that hard today because I am very much looking forward to chatting with Nancy Singer, and we'll do that in just a second or two. So again, appreciate it to everybody.
Yes, today we have with us Nancy Singer, who is one of the global leadership development executives for an elite Fortune 50 company for most of her career, considered a true pioneer and champion for women in leadership, and is now the founder and CEO of Singer Leadership Group and a leader in Lessons from Leaders and her chapter, Leveraging Your Core Values. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Susie. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you, Eric, for your help in the technology area. And then, hi, Sam. How are you? Good to be with you.
Very good. I guess we just got zoomed in here together. And again, to pick up on my excitement here, so glad, first off, that you participated as one of the 15, in this project and in this book. I think your chapter is awesome, with bias duly noted for a variety of different reasons, which we will talk about today. Also very excited that you are here. You kind of have a unique distinction amongst the tri-authors of this book. I know you worked, with Marshall, on a number of, projects and various things throughout your career. You and I go farther back than we probably, want to allude to, here on this LinkedIn Live session. and you and Kathy McDermott, the third co-author, also I think started your careers pretty much together, at Merck years ago. So all three of us, have direct experience with you, and you have direct experience, with all of us. So just candidly wanted to get that out there. In terms of lessons, for leaders that are out there tuning in today. Let's maybe go back in your career to the first time that you noticed it, or kind of said, okay, here's what this leadership thing is. Do you have any, like incident or series of events that took place that kind of shaped, like, here's what this is and here's what it's going to be like as you started your career?
Yes, I think everybody has those experiences of people who struck you growing up. Probably the strongest lesson I had was when I was in college. I worked in the dining hall from Rutgers University, go RU. And there, I worked for one of the managers, and we were responsible for leaving the dining hall clean at the end of the night after all the students had gone through. And he had a style of leadership, which was the first one I was really exposed to, that was basically instill fear, don't trust anyone, check the most obscure places that might not be clean, and then yell at people when they find like a single drop of milk someplace. So I just dutifully followed along after Wayne, and I followed that management style, thinking this is what leadership must be about. This is how, or this is at least how a good manager would work. They got to calling me Little Wayne, which was not a compliment. So and it was I'm like, okay, this is what it is. This is what I'm supposed to do. I yell at people, do all they should have had the video camera of everything not to do. And I was a great student of everything not to do. Coincidentally, as soon as I graduated, then I had an exact opposite experience. I was hired by Merck, and my first manager was an unbelievable gentleman who was so impactful in my life and shaping my leadership, gentleman by the name of Bob Marquis, and by the way, shaping the leadership styles of so many people throughout his life. And he taught me just the opposite. You trust people, set up an environment that is fear-free, where people can really tell you what's going on, give people the benefit of the doubt until they give you a reason not to. And then if somebody is not performing, you need to take action. And it was this complete opposite experience going from one to the other. And it got me fascinated by what's going on here? And this is about the time when some of these articles about, is leadership, are you a born leader, or can you be taught, started to come out. And so I started on a lifelong, really what became a passion around understanding what good leadership is, understanding why some of the leaders who are not so good, why they're not so good. Generally, it seems to come down to them being fairly insecure, has been my experience. They're more worried about themselves than everybody around them. And really understanding that in the end, the best leaders are about their people, and helping people thrive and achieve things that they didn't even think they could achieve on their own. So fortunately, I had Bob to follow Wayne, and I stopped being Little Wayne.
Well, and by the way, I know this is about you, but I also know Bob very, very well. And I will never forget that guy. First off, for all of the years that I had the privilege of doing work at Merck and with people at Merck, and all of the people that were there that knew Bob, which basically was everybody, I never heard, it wasn't like I heard anybody that ever said anything bad about him. I never heard anybody say anything that wasn't glowing or how he had impacted their career. I remember parts of management training, or early on at Merck. It was like there was a couple of hours dedicated to having him just come in and talk with new managers, and literally just giving him a seat in the room like he was Plato or something, and just fielding questions and talking from experiences. and everything. And I do think, and I've long thought, that those are really good grounding points for leaders to think about worst leader you've ever worked for. What did you learn from him or her? Best leader you ever worked for. What did you learn from him or her? And in some situations you get into, you don't know what to do. You at least know what not to do. How would Wayne handle this? That's okay. So I'm going to move in a very, very different direction. Also, if you wouldn't mind, just because it is kind of similar history that we have, and I also think very, very relevant for a lot of people that are out there kind of learning leadership and moving up the chain, so to speak. Tell us a little bit about the whole experiment where, Astra Merck was formed, and you were at Merck, and you joined this group of people that, I had, again, the privilege to work with. But what was going on with Astra Merck, and how did that experience, shape your career moving forward with, I would imagine, many of the things that you continue to do today in your private practice?
Yeah. Do we have 5 hours?
No, that's the unfortunate side of that. Okay. Yeah.
So many things happened. This was, for those of you on the line who are not familiar with Astra Merck. Astra Merck was a company that started with the resources of Merck and Astra Pharmaceuticals behind them. And they had 40 people come over as the founding directors for Astra Merck. Only 6 of them, by the way, were women. And when I got all over the guy who hired me and said, why are there not more women over here? What's going on? And he said, Nancy, we tried to get a lot more women, but they just wouldn't take the risk, or the perceived risk, of going over. And it was a risk at that point. We were told we would never be able to go back to the mothership of Merck, which turned out not to be true. But we were on our own, and these 40 people wanted to really make a difference in the world, and a difference in a way of building a pharmaceutical company from the ground up. It was a professional experience unlike any I've ever had, and really the best professional experience. And I think, Sam, the reason for that is the gentleman who hired me was one of the most influential managers I've ever had. And that's a gentleman by the name of Matt Emmons. And he had this way of understanding people, inspiring them, and sort of then just letting them go and create and build and innovate. And as a group of people, we, the 40 of us, really came over and said, we want to make this an amazing place to be. We want to make an amazing impact on the world. And so we all came from a company that was very structured, process. This is your job. Here it is. Here's the specific job description, to go make it happen. A blank sheet of paper. And for me personally, I got an opportunity to work with a broad set of people across a broad set of skills, and just deliverables that were just all over. And we had so much to do and not enough time to do it. So learning to prioritize and keeping the core mission and value of what Astra Merck was all about at our forefront at all times.
Yeah, in ballpark, this was 1992. 1992. Okay, yeah, and I can't tell you how many times I thought about this last year when we were all battling through COVID. Right, I was 30 something when all of that was taking place, and I remember thinking at the time, I'm not 30 something anymore, but I remember thinking,
you are 30 something, Sam. So
thank you for lying like that in front of everybody.
Yes, you're welcome.
I remember thinking at the time, this could be the coolest thing I ever have the opportunity to work with and work on. And I wasn't wrong there. And in a weird way, last year, I thought about that blank sheet of paper and so many things, so many times, as I watched people in our organization, and I know people, around industries around the globe, watched people in their 30s sort of dealing with a different kind of, desperate blank sheet of paper. And it's like, what are we going to do? How are we going to transform? How are we going to survive? What is, what is the next step? There's nobody to tell me. And so again, those experiences, like whether they're sort of planned or you're thrown into them, in many cases can really shape your entrepreneurial spirit as you move forward in your leadership career. And speaking of that, I know there was 14 other chapters in the book, and I know because we've talked that you had the opportunity to read through them. What other messages from other leaders, in the Lessons from Leaders book resonated with you, and why?
First of all, I thought there were lessons to be learned from each one of these amazing people. And I love that you combined people who are well known with people who are not so well known but have a story to tell. And in my current experience as a leadership coach and consultant, I have an opportunity to talk with stakeholders of my key clients. And a couple themes keep coming back. Now, I do specialize in female leaders and leaders of color, but I coach across a wide variety of folks. Consistently, especially with women and leaders of color, themes of they need to have more confidence. They need to develop their influencing skills. They need to have a little more courage to speak up in large meetings, that sort of thing. This comes back consistently time and again. So I was struck by Madeline Dean's stories and then Clarissa Eder-Smith's stories. And Madeline Dean, for those folks on the line who've not had a chance to read the entire book, is a congresswoman out of Pennsylvania. And she tells a couple of stories of being in the House in Pennsylvania and then also in Congress, where she was a freshman congressperson. And the ranking file explained to her as a freshman, your job here is to sit and to listen and to just take everything in. Don't say anything. And when issues that were very passionate to her, like gun control and healthcare and a number of other things came up, she found that she couldn't just sit there. And so she would, get signed up to go speak, or developed a caucus when no other freshman would ever develop a caucus before. And then the ranking file sort of came back and said, you're not supposed to do that as a freshman. Your job is to sit and listen. And her response was, I don't think the people of Pennsylvania elected me to sit and listen. I think they elected me to go do something. And I just love that. I mean, it was a wonderful story about her confidence and breaking through some of what might be considered cultural norms that may not be the healthiest cultural norms. And then Clarissa Eder-Smith, who is a leader of color and another female, in full disclosure, I know Clarissa, told a couple stories about finding your courage and being able to have the confidence to do something about that. So in high school, they had their high school graduation was delayed because of a couple of snow days that had been taken. So this meant they wouldn't graduate for a month past the original date. Well, Clarissa, at age 17, 18, and as a senior in high school, led a walkout in the school that got the graduation date changed back to the original graduation date. And I thought, man, the courage and ability to influence others that she demonstrated at age 18 was just incredible. And then knowing Clarissa, she's somebody who speaks her mind in a very appropriate way. There was another story told about an executive who was actually fired because he made a mistake. The press got hold of it, and the decision was to fire this person. And when people were talking about that later, and some of her senior leaders asked what her perspective was, she spoke up and said, I don't think that essentially the consequences were greater than the crime. And while there were many other disciplinary type of actions or consequential actions the company could have taken, and they went to the extreme, and was that really the fairest way to treat that person? So it's these stories, especially for me, that are so inspiring, of women who find their courage, their confidence, learn about themselves, and are not afraid to be themselves in the workplace, and then end up making an amazing difference. That's what struck me.
Yeah, those are two great stories. I am certain, I was going to say pretty sure, but I remember it amazed me when Kathy McDermott actually told me this. But Madeline was the first woman in the history of the state of Pennsylvania to be elected from Pennsylvania to the House of Representatives.
Really?
Which seems weird and amazing to me, because it seems like we've been around for quite a while. But yeah, she in like 2012 or something was the very first woman. And with her, I remember reviewing the transcript of her interview. Speak a little bit more to follow up on her, with like just the whole, where does confidence come from? Where does the ability, the first time that you're in front of, you're the first person that's elected into this body, and you have all kinds of people that have been there forever, who, by the way, happen to all be men, telling you, here's how this works. Okay. Like like you kind of just, don't get in trouble. Okay. Don't,
girl.
and for a while. And then, who knows, a little later, you're going to be able to, and her just saying, but when you read about and kind of peel the layers of the onion back a little bit on the way she was brought up, her mother, her father, just like things that she did, as a kid, that whole idea of confidence, she had that, and it was certainly put on trial, so to speak, when she was in those scenarios. But if you don't have that, what is your message to, women in particular that for whatever reason they haven't had that upbringing, they don't have that confidence, they lack that, they second guess themselves? What do you tell them? How do you coach them, just in very general terms?
Right. Those are all great questions. I think in Madeline Dean's case, and even Clarissa's case as well, sometimes we're just driven by passion. These were issues with Madeline Dean, as I understand it, that really meant a lot to her. And she may not have stopped to think about everything else because she just needed to be able to speak. I think there's a way of combining passion with judgment as well. Obviously, you don't want to jump out and do something that is like crazy and that could be consequential for your career, or maybe if you feel passionately about it enough, that might be worth taking that risk. But being able to consider the consequences, and generally the consequences that we make up in our heads are nowhere near as bad as the reality of the potential consequences. So Madeline Dean spoke up, and somebody who was around for a longer time came over and said, "You shouldn't have done that. That's the worst consequence." That's there strikes a story for me. An Asian woman working for a large healthcare company that I was one of my clients. I'd done some stakeholder interviews, and they said she really needs to speak up more in large meetings. We're just not hearing from her. And when I spoke to her, she's learning a little bit more about where she came from. She said, "Nancy, I was one of 7 children in an Asian family. The other 6, I was the youngest, and the other 6 were boys. When I spoke up at the dinner table, I was told my opinion didn't matter. I didn't need to speak, just listen to my brothers." And I was like, whoa. And it's amazing, as we spoke through that she had tied those two things together about not speaking up in conference rooms and meetings with the way she was told what she should do growing up. And once that raised to a level of awareness, that makes a big difference. Then you can consciously choose to continue this way or change it.
Yeah.
So, so a lot of that goes back to what I talk about in the chapter is this sort of amalgamation of what's your leadership best self? What are your values? Why are you doing the work that you're doing? And what kind of an environment do you want to create? And as well as like personal mission and vision statements. And I've worked with my clients to pull that together instead of in a scattered way with all of these different thoughts around, or perhaps different notes we've taken from development programs we've been through, or assessments or feedback we've gotten, to pull that together in a little bit more of a succinct way. And I use that as helping people develop a North Star statement as a way of pulling this stuff together to answer your direct question, to say, who do you want to be as a leader? And what does that look like? And then kind of you keep going back to that and saying, should I speak up or should I not? Am I being true to myself and the type of leader I want to be?
Yeah. And by the way, that is the core message of your chapter, and it is so very, very good. And I guess a follow-up question to that point, keeping Madeline and Clarissa, firmly in mind, and your examples that you've given them. At what juncture is it a good idea for people to figure this stuff out? I mean, where are you? I mean, because so many people still think of, and well, I got a question or two for you on, you were in charge of global leadership development, at Merck, right? So the formal training part of this. But in so many companies, they assign like, okay, leadership is when you're put in charge of people. It's when you get this promotion or that promotion, or you rise to this level or to that level where you have formal responsibility for a whole bunch of things, right? But this whole North Star example, I mean, there's really something here. When do you start figuring that out? Is it, is it when you meet Wayne, or after you meet Bob, or someplace in between, right? Like, or long after that. Yeah. Hopefully he's not on here, but if he is, feedback is a gift.
Yeah. Some 30 years later, right? It's funny, Sam. I coach students who are 18 and 19 years old. I coach people who have just gotten their first management job, and I coach people who are who've been managers for 10 years, and then I coach executives who are leaders of leaders and some leaders of leaders of leaders. And while it works across that spectrum, it really does. And just to say a little bit more about that, this was inspired by all of those different pieces, but also by a gentleman by the name of Bill George, who wrote a book called True North. And I wanted to take all of those different scattered pieces, if you would, and put them into something practical and easy. I'm all about easy, simple, practical, and real. So when I work with the students, I ask the same 3 questions to develop their North Star statement as I do with all of those other people, all the way up to the C-suite folks. And it's interesting because it's 3 parts. So the first thing we do is take an inventory of the values of somebody. And we do that through a series of maybe like a half an hour to an hour discussion. What are their true values? And we dig under that. So we get a really good list of that. And then we use those to make a 3-sentence statement that is their personal North Star. And if we do this right, that personal North Star is true for them when they're 18 or 19 years old, when they're in their 30s, or when they're in their 60s and they're retiring, perhaps. It might be tweaked a little bit, but it basically is linked to who that person is. So it goes something like this. The first part is, I am perceived as a blank, fill in the blank, leader. Hardworking, respectful, just, fair, kind, considerate, delivering results, something like that. We get all different types of adjectives in there based on this person's values. The second part is, I create an environment for my direct reports and or the people around me in order to be able to take in that sort of colleague's perspective and the idea that we work in project teams. That allows what is that environment? What kind of an environment? Do you want to create an empowering environment? Do you want to create an environment that exceeds expectations, delivers on results, an intellectually stimulating environment, whatever that might be, a regimented environment? I mean, there are all different types of environments people want to create. And then the third part, which is really where I find people sit back and say, whoa, is why? Why are you doing this? Why are you working in this industry? Why do you care about being perceived as a blank leader who creates an environment that's described this way? And that's where I get feedback from my clients that say, I never stopped to think about this all in one place. And it's like a transformational experience in some instances that people can put who they want to be in 3 sentences. And then they take that 3-sentence North Star statement, and that should be carry through and act as a touchstone and a guide for them in terms of if they get into a situation where they may not be creating an environment that they wanted to create, so it holds themselves accountable. It forces them to get feedback on a regular basis, because if you want to be perceived as a blank leader, you got to check in more than once a year, having a performance review to see whether you're actually achieving that or not. And then the why part is just so impactful, because they've actually written down why are they doing this work, what's important to them, and then are they achieving that? So it's been a very powerful tool. I highly recommend it for folks, no matter how old they are and no matter where you are in your career, because it's almost like the old saying, if you don't know where you're going, you won't know that you got, how will you know when you got there? So, so that's what that North Star piece is about.
Yeah, and that is very insightful. I mean, in terms of taking a look at just the whole philosophical look, you know, you're getting promoted. You're a leader, okay? What do you stand for? And by the way, why do you want to be a leader? Why do you aspire? Why do you aspire to that? Because I have long contested that when you ask, and organizations are certainly getting better at this, but when you ask most people, like, you know, so why do you want to be a district manager? they look at you like, well, you know, like you're not the smartest guy I've ever been in a room with, but because, like, you know, like that's my career track, right? So I'm earning this much here, and then if I'm a district manager, you know, and it is really, really rare that you ever find anybody that throws themselves in that pool that comes at it from a North Star standpoint. Like, I really think I've learned enough in my career as a representative or as a frontline employee doing whatever, that I've made enough mistakes and I've battled my way through enough things that I'm now in a position where I can be Bob Marquis or some semblance of that. I can help other people battle through that to help them be them best self. Very rarely do you hear that. I mean, people get into this leadership track without ever really, in many cases, considering what comes with that.
Right.
You know, and how, how is that going to impact you, and how are you going to work through all of these very nebulous sets of circumstances that, you know, that leaders find themselves in. You know,
I was just going to say, you just sparked a thought too. We'll go over to the formal training in just a second, but in the beginning of training classes, there was work done by the Gallup organization that asked people about their significant others and who would they list as their significant others. And in the beginning of any management training class that I was teaching, I would always tell this story because it was just so like, oh my gosh, in a ridiculously high amount of time, something like 75, 80% of the time, people would list their partner, their spouse as their significant other, maybe a parent, something like that. But their boss showed up in the top 10 a lot. And then often, very, very often, their boss showed up in the top 3 of who their significant others were, once you went past the singular significant other. And so for people who are just taking on leadership roles, or people who manage managers who manage other managers, as soon as you are somebody's leader, you are one of the significant others in that person's life. And it really, you got to take a breath and think about that, because that is an awesome responsibility. It's a huge responsibility, and it can help you guide how you speak with people, when you speak with people, how you handle performance problems, and all of that sort of thing. Because much like the basketball players or the football players who are role models, and may say, oh, I didn't want to be a role model. Too bad. You are, goes with territory. You are now somebody's significant other when you manage them. So it is an awesome responsibility, and really important to keep that in mind philosophically.
I think so many people, myself included, it's not like I'm like removed from this and I've had it together, but it's like you really underestimate the impact that you can have, by the way, either way in somebody's life. You can be Wayne, you can be Bob. You know, I mean, and you literally have a heck of a lot of control over that. And going through, I don't want to diminish it by calling it an exercise, but going through the process associated with, all right, what's my North Star? What do I stand for? What are my, how do I want people talking behind my back? You know, when they are saying, okay, so you worked for Nancy, what was that like? You know, what do you want those conversations to sound like? Back a little bit, although I don't want to leave this at all, to the formal training side of things. And let me bring Clarissa back in here. We've all been in those settings, right? We're at the table. There's a number of big dogs that are in the room. There's a tough decision that's being made. You know, so many of us have a tendency to see which way the momentum is going or which way the wind is blowing. And it's the absolute path of least resistance just to agree with whatever decision has been made, even if you really disagree with it. You know, to just not in a public forum saying. So Clarissa is somebody that raises her hand, and there's so many people out there that do, not enough, but so many, and hopefully more and more as we move forward. But is that a learned thing, or are you born with that? And I ask that of, as I mentioned, somebody that you know headed up global leadership development for, you know, like an amazing organization for a number of years. You talked about her when she was 18. She was doing these kinds of. Is that something through the process that you've identified with your coaching and or formal learning? Like what, like the percentage of impact that formal learning has on that? Can you take people that aren't oriented that way and sort of shift them in a direction where they start to be Madeline or Clarissa or Nancy or others? What's your response reaction to the age-old born or made question?
Yeah. I think it's a combination of both. I think there has to be a willingness and a desire to lead other people, and a drive to do that. And then I think, like anything, to the good leaders or people who are well skilled in whatever area they've chosen as their profession, have a combination of knowledge and experience, right? And what's always bothered me is that you would never think of putting me behind the controls of an airplane and say, okay, Nancy, you have a desire to fly the airplane. Go ahead, take off, give it a shot, give it your best.
You get paid more, yeah, you know.
I mean, heaven forbid, you know, the damage that could happen with that without a whole lot of formal training behind that about what to do, role plays about those simulators, when people, you know, what happens if the wind shear changes in the airplane, and or the simulators about even going to the moon, or even back to our sports analogy, the professional football players, for example, get videotaped all the time. They're making multi-millions of dollars, and someone's talking to them about the balance on their left foot when they reach the arm back by a 45-degree angle, when maybe it should have been a 90-degree angle, and their balance should have shifted to the right foot. Whatever it might be, there's constant room for improvement. So I think it's a combination of formal training, because that helps you learn about people, like through situational leadership. How do you do a performance review where you know, people's dignity stays in place, and are you being fair to people? How do you treat somebody who may be bullying you at work? Some simple frameworks to think about with that. Et cetera, the things that you learn in formal training, and then have a safe environment to practice and to role play and to drill on some of those things as leaders. And it's never too late to go back to that, and it's never too early to start to learn about that. I've often said we should have management training before you become a manager, because there's so much that can happen that you can mess up in the first month that you become a manager.
Oh, yeah.
including how do you introduce yourself to people? I mean, from the very beginning. And yet, unfortunately, there's not the emphasis that's put on formal training in the area of leadership that I personally believe that there should be. Now, we've gotten a lot better as a culture within the United States in understanding the value of training. But I would like it to someday get to the point where, like, you would never put me behind an airplane and say, go take off. We would never put somebody in charge of people and say, go ahead, you did a really good job at whatever functional skill you had. We think you should be a manager. How about it? So, and then you have the experience to add to that.
Yeah, I know, I'm sorry to cut you off, but he's just like, yeah, you've been in this role, X amount of time. So now it's time for you to go do this. And I couldn't, you and I have obviously chatted about this over the years quite a bit, but I really think there ought to be a conversation. And a guy like Bob Marquis used to have those conversations with young people that were aspiring, to either stay in a role, in his case, in field sales and or, move into management and move in that direction. But it's like, how do you feel about being judged? Because when you assume a role of leadership, you're going to be judged. Like, it's just part of the territory. You're going to be judged. And how are you with feedback? Because to your point, and I thought it was outstanding, the best leaders, they can't get enough feedback. They really can't. They are open to it. They want to hear. Doesn't necessarily mean they agree or they're going to change, but they really, kind of keep that channel of communication open, by the way, with everybody. It doesn't necessarily change decisions they're going to make or how they're going to act, but yeah. So the formal side of things, if nothing else, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. The formal side, the training side of things, hopefully in a proactive way, should communicate to aspiring leaders, this is what you're getting into. These are the kind of messes that are going to be dropped in your lap. These are the kinds of decisions that you're going to have to make. So in terms of that North Star we were talking about, is this for you? Is this a path that appeals to you? Because believe me, there's some trials and tribulations associated with that. And then post that, it's feedback, it's coaching, it's feedback, it's coaching, it's feedback, it's coaching, throughout your career. Is that a fair encapsulation of your position, or did I?
No, I would agree with that. And the one other piece, it's okay if this is not for you. It's not for everybody. And you may think it's one thing, and then you get into it and you see all of this, and it for one reason or another, you just may not want to do that, and that is perfectly okay. But even if you go on to be in your career an individual contributor, you're still working on a project team. Likely, it's very rarely that you sit, unless maybe you're an author or something, and you sit by a computer and don't interact with a lot of people all day. But most people interact with a lot of people all day, and they sit on project teams. So they have to be open to feedback. Having a North Star about how they want to show up with the people around them is important, and holding themselves accountable to showing up that way will help them be a better individual contributor, a more impactful person in other people's lives as well, whether you are their direct manager or not. And the other point you made to Sam too, it's always harder the higher you go in an organization, the less and less likely you are to get real feedback, because you have a position of power. There are consequences of people telling you the truth or their truth, whether it is a real thing or a perceived thing. Perception is reality, right? So sometimes you need help getting that feedback. And that is a critical piece of a work that is done with, especially more senior leaders, is going to stakeholders or having somebody else go on your behalf to stakeholders to say, how is this person perceived? What are they known for in the organization? What's their brand? And are they ready for the next level? And if not, why not? And what do they really need to do to get to the next level or to take on a broader set of responsibilities in the organization? And so having a manager do that for you, a human resources business partner do that for you, an executive coach, a leadership person, somebody do that for you to ask on your behalf, as well as you creating a very open environment to hearing feedback and to growing from that is absolutely critical. And it never, ever goes away. It just gets more and more important the higher in the organization that you go. And I think you and Marshall and Kathy have probably all seen that and experienced that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned his name. Well, Kathy's too, but Marshall's in particular, because I really think that's the best description I've ever heard of what Marshall does and his primary contribution. And there have been many, but it's kind of like what got you here won't get you there, right? I mean, potentially the best title in the history of titles of books and art. But it literally is. You take people that have been doing that leadership thing for 15 or 20 years in some cases, and you get them to the point where they aspire, to go further. And now it really becomes, how receptive are they to the whole idea that they fundamentally may have to change one or two behaviors that kind of are the essence of their image, or their brand. It kind of like it defies common sense. And so if you're going to say something to you like, hey, we really need you to improve your listening, you'd be receptive to that. A lot of times, a lot of times people are, listen to who? What are you talking about? Right. Listen, I'll show you listening. Yeah. And so in that context, it sounds like a little thing, but in many cases, it's a very big one. Let me ask you this question. I think I know the answer, but let me just go out there and ask it. Why women? Why is the focus of your practice really dedicated to women? Because everything that I've heard you say, I think you've seen me like scribbling things like, believe me, you more than most know how many things I can improve, but it seems like your message, your messages, they're applicable, like across genders, certainly. And I would suggest universally, but why women? What's the North Star reason behind you helping women, if you will?
That's an interesting question. So you talked earlier about some of the experiences we had, and you would think we were, should be 115 years old talking about, back in the day. So all of my career, most of my career, the majority of my career, I was often the only woman at the table or one of only two women at the table. Couple pivotal things around that. I tell the story. I was only the third district manager for a large pharmaceutical company that became pregnant while she was a district manager. My boss was phenomenal about it. He was fine. He's like, that's just fine, not a problem. But his bosses, the executive directors of sales and sales operations, stopped and had a meeting about me because I was working in a district that was an experimental district. This company's trying to decide whether to develop this type of sales force or that type of a sales force. And they had pilots going in both places. And I was one of two people working as a hospital district manager at that time. So they stopped business and they had a meeting about what are they going to do about Nancy because she's pregnant. And again, you would think I was 115 years old telling you these stories. And my son's in his 30s. He's 30 years old.
Clearly you're not. Clearly, yes.
Thank you, Sam. So it's situations like that. Sitting at the table with the human resources leadership team and seeing leaders of color as well as females that were looking at the statistics, how many are at this level, that level, this level. The company, one of the companies I was working for, putting a goal in place to have such a percentage of women in leadership positions by X amount of time. And 2 years before that, people raising the flag saying, you are nowhere near on track. And nobody was there to be held accountable. They reacted, and they came and wanted to put a leadership development program in place for women and asked me to do that, and I was delighted to do that. But and then I'm sorry, the first pivotal piece was the district manager thing, and actually, and the other piece was my father. I had gotten my first management job when I was 27 years old, and we had vacation, and my dad and I were sitting out at the porch down at the Jersey Shore, and he was giving me some advice. He said, Nancy, don't try to be one of the guys, because you are not, and it's not going to go over well. And I have heard my father over and over and over again in my ear, and that goes sort of back to that North Star. So how do women who don't have role models ahead of them, fortunately it's not a lot of that case now, figure out who to follow? And for me it was, should I be like that guy, or that guy? And so not having strong female mentors until a little bit later in my career. It's not like there weren't some, and there were quite a few who helped me eventually. But so I have this passion about developing women and developing leaders of color. And then in particular for me, after 30 years of my first career and my first legacy, if you would, as someone coached me to think about it, I'm now in my second career and my second legacy. And I strongly believe that hopefully within about 50 years, maybe less, this planet will be led by women and leaders of color. It's starting to get there. And I want to leave the planet in a better place. So if I can help these leaders accelerate their learning, learn from mistakes that other people have made, help them be more practical in their experiences and in their leadership style, and help them get to understanding themselves and a heightened awareness of who they are at their core, and forcing them to say, why are you doing this? I hope that to leave the planet in a better place. No small vision, but that is my vision.
Well, very well stated. And I'm reminded Frances Hesselbein, another contributor to the Lessons from Leaders book. She asks like very simple questions, but she says, when people look at leadership, people look at positions, like the formal leaders, do they see themselves? Can they identify? Can they see themselves? So, in that regard, extremely important. Unfortunately, it's the bewitching hour. Here we are.
That's amazing.
This kind of flew by for me as well. By the way, Kelly Stewart, one of our contributors here, he says, great comment. They're like, just consider here for a fact that without women, there wouldn't be any men, which is something I think we all should kind of take. But final comment, and again, kind of looking to that vision, that future, kind of what's out there. One piece of advice you would give to leaders today, moving forward. If somebody said, just tell me, soundbite it for me, just one thing, that I should really, take to heart here. What would it be if there is just one?
So I'm Irish, and you can never ask an Irish person to narrow things down to just one. I'll do my best trying to be an exemplar of priorities. Start with knowing yourself. Know yourself intimately. Figure out who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses, your hot buttons, your values, and why you're doing this. And if you can't get there by yourself, that's okay. Get some help to do that. And the sooner that happens, everything else falls into place. And then the other thing is, if you are a leader of other people, consider that you are one of their significant others. And talent is everything. Your people are everything as a leader. So that's where I would suggest people focus.
Well, true to your Irish heritage, that was at least 3 answers, but I think they were all, very, very good. I can't tell you, again, what a pleasure it has been to share this experience, both your participation in this book and the discussion, walking down memory lane with you today. So from the bottom of my heart and everybody at the Center for Leadership Studies, thank you very much. And Susie, I will kick it back to you. Thanks to everybody for showing up.
Thanks, everybody.
Sam and Nancy, thank you so much for today's conversation. Nancy, I'll be honest, I don't typically add a personal note at the end of these sessions, but being a young mom, a leader, working for a training organization, just so many of the things that you said today resonated with me, and I hope is the same for our audience. So just wanted to thank you personally. But more importantly, to learn more about Nancy Singer or Lessons from Leaders, please visit lessonsfromleadersbook.com. Also, if you're interested in signing up for future events, please register on the Center for Leadership Studies LinkedIn company page. Thank you so much, everyone.
This book will give you a wide array of really interesting, thoughtful, and practical ideas from some incredibly wise people.
It provides such a rich variety of leadership journeys from so many great leaders with different backgrounds, experiences, and areas of focus and service.
I think you're going to find this entertaining, it's going to be practical, and it's lessons from leaders that you can take back and use.
Pick up a copy of Lessons from Leaders.